Everything you think you know about the origin of civilization is missing the beginning. The writing, the law, the mathematics, the schools, the astronomy, the concept of time as we measure it. None of it began in Greece. None of it began in Rome. None of it began in Egypt. It began in a flat river valley between two rivers in what is now southern Iraq. It began with a people called the Sumerians. And it began so long ago and was so thoroughly removed from the story Western civilization tells about itself that most people alive today cannot name them. This is the story of the civilization that built everything, and the story of why you were never taught their name. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a region the ancient Greeks called Mesopotamia, meaning simply the land between the rivers, is one of the most archaeologically significant places on the entire surface of the earth. Today, it is largely desert and agricultural flatland in modern Iraq. Unremarkable to look at, difficult to imagine as the cradle of anything. But beneath that flat, dry ground lies layer upon layer of buried cities. Cities that go down and down and down. And at the bottom, older than any other urban civilization the archaeological record has ever produced, is Sumer. The Sumerian civilization emerged in southern Mesopotamia around 4500 BCE. That date needs to sit with you for a moment. 4500 BCE. That is 6,500 years ago. The Egyptian pyramids at Giza, which most people think of as ancient beyond comprehension, were built around 2500 BCE. Sumer predates them by 2,000 years. Ancient Egypt, at the height of its power, was looking back at Sumer the way we look back at ancient Rome. Sumer was old when Egypt was young. But here's the part no one talks about. It is not the age of Sumer that is most extraordinary. It is what they built. In approximately 3400 BCE, over 5,000 years ago, the Sumerians developed the first writing system in human history. Called Cuneiform, it began as pictographic symbols pressed into wet clay tablets with a reed stylus. Within centuries, it had evolved into a sophisticated script capable of recording not just inventories and receipts, but literature, law, mathematics, medicine, and myth. The oldest story ever written, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is Sumerian. It predates the Iliad by 1,500 years. It contains a flood narrative, a story of a great deluge sent by the gods, survived by one righteous man who built a vessel and saved living creatures, that predates the biblical account of Noah by over 1,000 years. And this is where things get genuinely extraordinary. Because writing was only the beginning. Around 2100 BCE, a Sumerian king named Ur-Nammu produced the earliest known legal code in human history. Not a set of customs or traditions passed down orally. A written legal code, with specific laws, specific penalties, specific protections for the vulnerable, widows, orphans, the poor, against exploitation by the powerful. The Code of Hammurabi, which most history curricula present as the origin of written law, came 500 years later. It was built on Sumerian foundations. The mathematical system we use to measure time, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle, is Sumerian. They developed a base 60 numerical system of extraordinary sophistication. Astronomers using this system track the movements of planets with accuracy sufficient to predict celestial events years in advance. They identified 5 planets visible to the naked eye. They mapped their movements. They developed a lunisolar calendar that synchronized the lunar month with the solar year. All of this was produced by a civilization that had no telescope, no computer, no inherited scientific tradition to build upon. They built the tradition. Scientists still struggle to fully explain the speed of Sumerian intellectual development. What happens next changes everything. Because the story of Sumer is not just the story of what they built. It is the story of what happened to their place in history. In 1835, a British army officer named Henry Rawlinson was stationed in Persia, modern Iran. On a cliff face near the town of Behistun, he noticed a massive inscription carved into the rock face approximately 300 feet above the ground. It was written in 3 scripts simultaneously, one of which was Cuneiform. Rawlinson spent years, at significant personal risk, suspended on rope platforms against the cliff face, copying the inscription. His copies, combined with the work of several other scholars across Europe, eventually cracked the code of cuneiform. For the first time in over 2,000 years, someone could read what the people of ancient Mesopotamia had written. What they read shocked them. The tablets they began translating described a civilization of extraordinary complexity. Legal systems, mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, medical texts, philosophical poetry, religious hymns, all produced thousands of years before the civilizations that Western academic tradition credited with inventing these things. The response from the established academic community of 19th century Europe was not immediate celebration. It was resistance. But here's the part that reframes everything. The resistance was not random. It was structural. The Western academic tradition of the 19th century had built its entire narrative of civilization's development on a foundation that placed Greece as the origin point of rational thought, Roman law as the origin of legal systems, and biblical chronology as the framework for human history. Sumer didn't fit. Sumer predated Greece by 3,000 years. Sumer's legal codes predated Roman law by 2 millennia. And Sumer's flood narrative predated and structurally paralleled the biblical account in ways that created enormous institutional discomfort. For decades, Assyriologists, the scholars who studied ancient Mesopotamia, fought for their field's significance within academic institutions that were reluctant to reorganize their entire understanding of human history around a civilization that had been invisible for 2,000 years. Some of that resistance persists in curriculum design to this day. Ask the average person in the USA or UK who invented writing. Most cannot answer. Ask them who built the first cities. Most cannot answer. Ask them who wrote the first story ever recorded by human hands. Most cannot answer. The answers to all 3 questions are the same: the Sumerians. And this is where things get genuinely awe-inspiring. Because Sumer's legacy is not historical. It is immediate. It is present. It is operating in your life right now, today, in ways so fundamental that you cannot function without it. The 60-second minute you use to measure your day, Sumerian. The 360-degree circle your GPS navigation system uses to calculate your position, Sumerian. The concept of a legal code that protects individuals from arbitrary power, Sumerian. The practice of formal education in dedicated institutions. The first schools in human history were Sumerian, called edubas, where scribes were trained to read and write cuneiform, Sumerian. The narrative structure of a story with a hero, a journey, a crisis, and a resolution. The Epic of Gilgamesh established this architecture 5,000 years ago. Every film you have ever watched, every novel you have ever read, every story you have ever been told operates within a framework that the Sumerians built. You are living inside a civilization that the Sumerians designed. You just didn't know their name. Here is the thought that stays with you long after this video ends. In the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, rebuilt and restocked after significant losses during the conflicts of the early 21st century, there are thousands of cuneiform tablets, inscribed by human hands 5,000 years ago. Some are records of grain shipments and livestock counts. Some are mathematical tables. Some are astronomical observations. Some are literature. And some have not been fully translated yet. In museums and university collections around the world, there are an estimated 500,000 cuneiform tablets. Scholars estimate that only a fraction of them have been fully studied and translated. There are still things the Sumerians wrote that no living human being has yet read. Stories, knowledge, observations about the world made by some of the most intellectually sophisticated people who ever lived, waiting in clay for someone to finish reading.